We ready? All right. Good evening. Welcome to our panel on PTSD and cannabis. I'm Senator Segerblom. Thank you so much for coming. As I said, thank you for skipping the 7th game of the World Series to hear this, but I think you're going to find it actually much more rewarding. The reason we're doing this tonight is because Veterans Day is just around the corner, and also it's pretty appropriate given what happened on October 1st, because I know a lot of people are suffering stress in Las Vegas and a lot of issues with trauma, maybe not PTSD, so I think it's all very important. But we know pretty much that the present treatment, at least the medical treatment for PTSD is not working, and this panel will tell you that there are other ways to look at it and treat it and experiment. So that's what we're going to do tonight, is talk about those different areas, and starting with the personal experience of the panel members, then let them talk about where they see the future. But with that, I'll go ahead and introduce each panelist, then I'll have them talk about each of themselves and their background. I'll ask questions, and at the end you'll have questions that you can ask too, but feel free to, something that pops up, raise your hand and we'll try to interject it at that time, because we want this to be interactive. And also, this will be posted on YouTube, I think, at the Reef webcast, so you'll be able to see it if you've missed something. But first, let me introduce Dr. Sue Sisley. She should have been a professor here at UNLV. I brought her here a couple of years ago, she'd almost be tenured by now. But UNLV, to its disgrace, really, said, "Oh my God, we don't think she knows what she's talking about," and so we're going to stick with our ways. But anyway, she is the world's expert, and she's also, remember, she's a medical doctor, so she stuck her neck out, risked her license on behalf of veterans, and that is, you could never.
Thank you guys. I appreciate that.
Matt Morgan is the CEO of Reef Dispensaries, who has a lot of things to tell us, but also his company is the sponsor of tonight's event, so thank him for that.
Yeah.
Dr. David Udy is a Vietnam vet and PTSD activist here in Las Vegas. His doctorate is in public health, but he knows our community, and he's very familiar with the issues that we're going to talk about tonight. And then we have a very special guest, Dray Gardner, who's a yoga instructor and creator of Silent Savasana. I apologize. I had it. But anyway, very, very lucky to have him, because he brings a whole other dimension to it, which is very important. But with that, actually, Dray, we'll start with you, and if you could just talk a few minutes about your background and then how you came to this, to be involved with cannabis, and maybe where you see us going.
All right. I'm Dray Gardner. I moved to Las Vegas in 1991. I moved from South Central Los Angeles via Orange County. And right around, the 90s, I realized that I needed to change my ways. So I couldn't change my ways in my environment, so I changed my environment. I came to Las Vegas where nobody knew me, and I could be the friendly person I always wanted to be, and really try to go back inside and do this dirty work that I talk about, that we all need to do, which is the work in. When I moved here, you can get a felony for a seed. And I was medicating myself back then, and everybody looked at me like I was the voodoo child, because there was nobody who was really smoking cannabis out in public, per se, or with others having knowledge of it. Make a long story short, 2007, my back gave out. The doctors told me they wanted to give me back surgery, and there began my yoga journey. I picked up a yoga mat, and my first class ended up being 30 days of yoga straight. After 30 days, I turned around and did another 30 days. So it was like Forrest Gump. I turned around and did 60 days of yoga. And at that point, I really realized that yoga can help more than just physical. And I dived in deeper, and the deeper I got into yoga, the more I healed myself, because yoga teaches us that you cannot serve two masters. It's either empowerment or enslavement. So I had to welcome my wounds and turn my wounds into wisdom. I had to welcome my pain and turn my pain into power. And essentially, that's what yoga has done for me, to help me deal with my post-traumatic stress as well as, just life in general. And I think we all need avenues to try to better ourselves, and yoga has definitely changed my whole perception of life. And I went in to fix my back, and everything about me changed. So we have to also be receptive, and a lot of times we have to get out our own way. We're so used to our old paradigms or ways, saying that I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that, or I can't make time. And as long as you're not going to make time, you're never going to heal. Bottom line, we have to own our own shit and know that, there's no more running. Because wherever you run to, there you are. And yoga forces you to face these inner demons, or face these problems that we've been suppressing for so long, and turn them into power. Because the longer you wait to have that tough conversation, the tougher that conversation becomes. The longer you hold on to anything in life, the heavier it gets. And some of us have been walking around for decades, quarter centuries, holding on to pains of our past. And they're heavy now. And until we heal these wounds, they're going to bleed. So we can put as much Band-Aid, gauze, Neosporin on these wounds, numbing agents, call it what you want. But until we heal these wounds, they bleed into our present right now. So yoga has taught me to not only me face my issues, but to force others to face theirs as well. Because in order to talk about the path, you have to walk the path. And I'm walking my path. And I think that's why I'm able to connect with so many people, because I think every person that you see in this room is dealing with some type of struggle you know nothing about. It's just that all wounds aren't visible. So we all need to do this work collectively if we want to make ourselves better and be the best versions of ourselves every day. Thank you.
Matt?
Thank you.
Oh yeah, we'll get some contact information to you.
Mic check.
Okay,
Most definitely.
It's working?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. I'm Matthew Morgan, born and raised in Missoula, Montana. As a farm kid growing up, I have thousands of cannabis stories. I got fully immersed into the industry in 2008. And I've been every single day since then. I've been actively involved in the space, helping as many people as possible using cannabis. So like I said, there's a ton of stories. We're currently in Arizona and Nevada, but I'm going to focus my stories this evening upon PTSD, people that are suffering from PTSD, specifically veterans as well. And I've seen full circle as far as people healing themselves with natural remedies. So when I see the VA shoveling out pharmaceuticals, it's very mind-boggling to me. So I'll hold the rest of my stories until we move on with the program. But that's my story in a nutshell. So
Thank you. Sue?
Yeah, I would say, I started out as a true skeptic. I had been trained in a really conservative medical model in Arizona, where you don't view anything as a medicine unless it's been put through the entire FDA drug development process. So it's taken me years to actually come to this point to view cannabis as a medicine, because you get pummeled with this during your medical school curriculum that cannabis is just a dangerous, addictive drug, and it's really hard to kind of deprogram yourself from that, and especially as the pharmaceutical companies play such a dominant role in medical education that it's really hard to kind of reconcile how that is. So eventually I came to realize that I didn't have any very good tools to treat PTSD. Many of you may not be aware there's only 2 FDA-approved medications that are on the market to treat PTSD, just Zoloft and Paxil, that's it. So all these other meds that we pummel people with over the years are all being used off-label. They've never been formally tested for PTSD. All these psych meds like the lithiums and Depakotes, all these anticonvulsants and antipsychotics, and we basically throw the book at people until they finally end up on 10 or 12 different medications to treat this syndrome. And I eventually started to see so many suicides in my own medical practice, mostly veterans, but I also lost a lot of first responders, including firemen and policemen and ambulance drivers, who I didn't fully understand the profound impact of just seeing daily horrific scenes on the road, wherever, going into homes and finding dead bodies everywhere. It's just, I don't think we fully comprehend the brutal experience of being in that profession where you're seeing that, for 20 or 30 years on a daily basis. So I became aware of, really, the first thing was the epidemic of veteran suicide. That's what woke me up to the problem that we don't have any really good treatments for PTSD, and the veterans were the ones who really taught me about the potential of cannabis to help them, first of all, to substitute for a lot more addictive meds that they were getting put on, like the opioids and the benzos, and then, and starting to realize that these vets who were using cannabis successfully were the vets who were alive, who were holding down jobs and being functional, high-functioning part of their families. So eventually I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't dismiss these claims because they were so powerful, and the collateral history from family members claiming that, or reporting their observations, it was undeniable over time. So that's when we started getting involved in research and trying to bring, real objective data to the table. I think that's what we've been lacking, is controlled trials in this space that really help definitively answer these questions about, does cannabis work for this illness, and if so, what strains, what phenotypes are best, and maybe which phenotypes of cannabis should be avoided. Maybe there are some that are detrimental. So that's the kind of thing we hope to answer with this controlled trial that we're currently doing.
Dr. Udi.
Basically, I'm just here for a good time.
Oh, that's me. I'm the one that just uses it for fun.
I have been dealing with PTSD for decades before it was ever defined as a problem, as a clinical issue. And I have a number of experiences from my time in Vietnam, but I really feel like I got my doctorate degree in this particular subject for the 3.5 years that I was the health service administrator for all of the jails here in southern Nevada. So I had the Henderson Detention Center, the North Las Vegas Jail, and the Las Vegas Jail. So if you put to bed 2,500 inmates every night for 3.5 years, you start to realize that maybe this PTSD issue has got some legs to it. And I think most recently I've just been kind of dealing with those issues myself and trying to, I don't think there's any real treatment, but I think the effort is to try to coexist. And that is where cannabis has been a godsend to me. It has allowed me to coexist when many bleak things would have pushed me over the edge if it wasn't for that particular medication. So my issue at this point, and the reason I started barking so much after the shooting here in town, was because of the effect of all of the first responders, all of the police, all of the firemen, everybody else that was involved in that issue, and they're prohibited from taking advantage of the medicine that has saved my life before. So with that, I just say that's why I started barking, and that's one of the issues that brought me here tonight. Thank you.
My first question was going to be talking about anecdotes, but I think we've already talked about a few anecdotes, so let's move on to the next question. So from each of your perspectives, if you know what the current treatments are, what are we getting wrong with the current way we treat PTSD? And maybe we could go backwards. Dr. Uday, you want to start there?
In defense of the VA, I love the VA. They have done some great things for me. They're a great help. They're constantly coming to my assistance. But you need to understand the paradox that they're in and the way the system is designed. As I tell people, if you just roll the window down in your car, you can just drive by the VA and they'll throw the pills right into the back seat. So again, in their defense, they don't know what the hell to do either. And I can't tell you how many doctors I've talked to that have said, you know, if we could just do some research, if we could actually just do some things and find out some answers, or at least find out some better questions. And that's where we're at. We have no opportunity for research. There are no answers coming. We can bring people together here who sense and have a feeling, through personal experience or not, that there's something here. But as soon as we walk out this door, it becomes a dream again. So whatever is necessary to move us beyond that point is where we need to begin.
Makes sense, yeah. I would say too, you know, we have a real lack of commitment from our government to uncover new treatments for PTSD. I've been amazed that, you know, you would think this controlled trial that we're currently doing took us 7 years to get through all of the regulatory hurdles. You would think that with this epidemic of veteran suicide in this country, that the government would have fast-tracked a study like that that would look at the potential of cannabis for treating PTSD, but instead they stonewalled it at every turn, and we, you know, continue to run into hurdles at all levels of the government trying to continue this work. But I will say, you know, that I'm really disappointed that we don't have more options, and what we were hoping to do tonight was just kind of highlight some of the alternative and complementary therapies that are available to treat PTSD rather than just relying on pharmaceuticals, because that's always the knee-jerk reflex from us in the physician community, is that it's just so easy for us to just write out a script, and you know, eventually these guys snowball onto 8, 10, 12 different prescriptions to treat this syndrome. This is the problem. Psychiatry hasn't come very far, so we still treat each of these target symptoms with a different prescription, right? So we all know PTSD is such a complex syndrome. Everything from anxiety and depression to insomnia and nightmares and everything in between. And so in order to manage this whole constellation of symptoms, you end up getting a different prescription for each of these target symptoms. But the idea is what we all find so fascinating about this plant, that this cannabis plant seems to be able to target all of these symptoms within, you know, this single intervention, and that's what's so important. But there's so many other complementary treatments that that we're going to hopefully get to touch on today, including what we talked about earlier with yoga and mindfulness, meditation. There's so many elements. We have, you know, patients utilizing everything from equine therapy to, you know, an app on their phone that helps them meditate whenever they want. So hopefully we'll be able to highlight. The idea is to bring some healing to this community that's been ravaged by this awful event in October, and to help folks see that there are other resources available, because this is a very complicated situation here. This PTSD mixed with grief. There's people that are, you know, they're grieving heavily, but PTSD may not even have surfaced yet. And we want to kind of touch on the fact that there's post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that may not have arisen But there is a delayed onset for people. Sometimes you don't even notice this for 6 months or a year or even years from now. But I just wanted to mention that I'm getting messages from people here in Las Vegas. I'm getting flooded with Facebook messages and calls to our laboratory from people here looking for relief and wondering if cannabis could help. So they're just doing a simple Google search and finding our clinical trial and asking if they can be part of it. They actually want to be enrolled and they want to be able to experiment with it. Many of these guys have never used cannabis their whole life, so.
Awesome.
Matthew, I'm sure.
So I think either one's good. So I think when you talk about an issue or a problem, you got to start with the root of it. And I believe the root of the issue is with the federal government's stance on cannabis. If we can get the federal government to change its stance and reform on cannabis, I think it's going to open up a ton of different doors for us. I think the NFL gets on board, the UFC, the VA. I think it's crazy that we all have to sit up here and we're going off of guesswork and trial and error. I think it blows my mind. And so, thanks to people like Sue, bless her heart, which has taken her years to get to where she is today. These things should be easy. We should be able to put these together in a matter of months and get the proper research documented so that we can potentially use a natural ailment versus something that's made inside of a laboratory. It's crazy. But I think first and foremost we have to change, like I said, the federal government's stance on cannabis, and then I think we'll see very large movement as far as acceptance.
It is crazy that the big veterans groups have all come out and said to the VA, let doctors prescribe it, let's do it, and it seems to fall on deaf ears. Just amazing that they're very powerful politics. But
it's like they're turning a cold shoulder to it, pretending it's not around.
Right.
Well, it's because they would want to take over it for us and not allow us, who have been doing this for how many years? They want to take it over, and then who knows what they're going to put in it and all those other things.
Dray.
It's often asked, Dre, what have you gained from yoga? And really, it's not really what I've gained, it's what I've lost. And that's doubt, worry, control, just the simple things that make your life easier. And to me, yoga is like the tip of the iceberg in terms of mindfulness and awareness and really tapping back into ourselves, because again, so much of our life is spent on the exterior, doing for others, showing up for others, and we don't show up for ourselves. So to me, like once we as a people take our responsibility, 100% accountability and responsibility for ourselves, I think that everything will get better. But right now we're putting it in other people's hands. We're asking people I need you to fix me, when really we need to try to fix ourselves first.
And folks on that, Sue, how did, in your trial, do they smoke it? How do they do it? And then how do you, if people smoke different amounts, they smoke, one puff now, or they put 10, so this is basically self-titrate, so how do you measure that kind of how do you do a study like that?
Yeah, well, this is a smoking study. So this is, we purchase the raw flower from the federal government. That's the only option. It's the only federally legal supply of cannabis is from the University of Mississippi. So you probably have seen pictures of this online. It's pretty disappointing to fight for 7 years and end up with the quality of this study drug. But the veterans, the veterans smoke this, and they're allowed to self-titrate. This was a really controversial method with the FDA. When we first applied to the FDA, they were completely opposed to this model, but we fought really hard to maintain that, because we felt so strongly that botanical medicine should be, should be about what the patient needs, and each patient, it should be tailored to each specific case instead of forcing people into a fixed dosing model. And that's part of why I believe that a lot of these previous studies that you've seen in the literature don't show much efficacy. If you look at, I was always mystified by that. Why is it that the patients are reporting these incredibly powerful experiences with cannabis, very transformative, healing experiences, and yet the scientific literature doesn't seem to convey that, doesn't echo that. And so I think part of that is because we're forced to use this really suboptimal study drug, and we force people to take a fixed dose in these controlled trials. So sometimes, patients would be required to take 50 milligrams 3 times a day. And in our study, many of the veterans, need very little. I mean, some of these guys will take 2 puffs of the flower at night, and that's all they need to initiate sleep and suppress their nightmares. And so that's the problem. Is I think it's important for the public to know that many of these older trials required fixed dosing. It wasn't a good model, and we're hoping that now that the FDA has approved our model of patient self-titration, so the patients adjust their dose to meet their, to target their PTSD symptoms, and then they stop. They're not striving to get high. They're just striving to manage their symptoms, and then they return their unused cannabis each week, which sounds pretty sketchy, but they're actually doing it. They're returning their unused amount. So each day, whatever amount they use, they're given enough that they could take almost 2 grams a day. And then in each vial, they leave the amount that's remaining. They bring it back, we weigh it. So that way we get some sense of what each patient needs daily, and then we hopefully will use that data to fuel a phase 3 trial with the FDA. So the next step would be to go to phase 3 and kind of coalesce that information and design the next step.
Dick.
Yes.
I see hands raising. We're going to do questions at the end. Just let everyone know that.
If I can interject for a second on what she said, I can't tell you how much respect I have for this lady, and how long I've been following her effort, and all of the different alternatives that she's tried to make this come to the forefront. And I think what it is saying to me is that while that is a noble effort, I think the response and what we're seeing in the government, particularly today, makes that unrealistic. I think we need definitely to think about alternative mechanisms to not only fund, but to execute the kind of research that is necessary. And it starts by just taking the minuscule data we have and putting it out there and making it available to a larger community. The people that are involved now are extremely good at what they do, but we need a broader platform with which to get the message across. And I know from the beginning of the program here in Nevada, my biggest gripe, and I have made some statements on television and at some of the different workshops that they've had, is the fact that we really need a process where if we have developed a testing mechanism in this state, why isn't that information available? Why don't we know who is smoking what kind of strains in this state? Why don't we know how much is being purchased and how much is being used? I mean, we at the very basic level, we can't get off the ground. And when I talk to universities, I usually frame this discussion in the reference of kind of evolutionary time and revolutionary time. And when it comes to science and mathematics and the movement of the elements of our society, it is moving at revolutionary time. But as humans, we're moving at evolutionary time. We can barely move from one day to the next on issues. And yet, you've seen the advertisements of this Watson that's on TV. It won the game show several years ago. It reads 8,000 completed research articles a day. As human beings, how long will it take each of us to read 8,000 articles? It can't be done, and it's moving further and further away from us all the time. We need revolutionary new approaches, revolutionary new mechanisms, and I'll close with a quick show of hands. How many of you would consider at a nominal price, let's say $20, getting involved in a crowdsourced research project, where with that $20, we can do the test of the samples, we can delegate who does what, we can make all of the different forms that, no, I will not sue you if I get cancer from this drug or whatever is necessary to make that possible. And yet trying to do that through the FDA, I mean, to me, it's laughable. I can't even say it without laughing. It's so ridiculous to take the same approach. Isn't there something about insanity, doing the same thing over and over again? It took this lady 7 years to get to where she's at. My God, she could have done amazing answers to some of our most fundamental problems in a year and a half. And yet, every day, I'm sure she's struggling. Where do we go from here? How do I do this? How are we going to pay for this? Are they going to objectify it, put this in? It's just insane. There has to be other ways.
Well, you sound like a legislator. Because the reality is, it is pretty insane. But you know, some of us have to just keep beating our head against the wall and hopefully pushing it down the thing. But it also takes people who come along and say, let's just try it differently. I mean, we ought to just go back and look. I started the 1st of July when we went rec. Did Nevada become a happier place? I think probably all the amount of dope that had been purchased, we're a lot happier today than we were back in June. So I think just there's one subjective sense of what it means. Well, we're getting there. Just everything's an evolution, and
need more manufacturing capacity.
So he's going to double his capacity. There's other people here doubling their capacity. So you'll be very pleased.
Oh, I'm just kidding.
No, but that is a big gripe, so we're working on it for sure.
All right. How about this? And maybe Dray, you can focus on this because you see a lot of different people who come to you with. I don't know if they say they're PTSD. Maybe they do, but do you see different ways people develop PTSD, or how they articulate why they have PTSD?
Oh boy, yeah, I see quite a bit. I hear quite a lot of different stories from different walks of life after our yoga events, where people just line up and they tell me different stories about trauma that they're dealing with. You know, expectations of family. You'd be surprised how many people are on the cusp of suicide because of PTSD that walk up to me and tell me after our events. And there's part of my staff who get to hear some of these stories. And you know, it doesn't have a name, it doesn't have a face, it doesn't have a socioeconomic class, it doesn't have a race. All different walks of life. People are just, for whatever reasons right now, contemplating taking their life at an all-time high to me, and I can't understand why. But I think it's because society in itself is really malicious right now. You know, I'll be 50 in April, and right now I think that, like, these are intense times. You know, we have tons of technology, but as we get technologically advanced, we stop really having personal interaction. So to get help or the fellowship is becoming almost obsolete, to where life is just, people are so caught in their ways, you know, and a lot of times when you want to talk to somebody, they're sitting there on their, what did you say? So again, even when you trying to fellowship or trying to ask for help, people are on their own grind these days, and they're not really what I consider being an earthling, looking out for their brother or their sister, taking time out to really check out the technology and how are you doing, brother? Right. How you doing? I mean, that don't happen no more. How you doing, sister? Right. I mean, that's obsolete these days. And I think these are the reasons why people are looking to check out of here.
I think because as a country as to take, but that does.
Remember, we're saving the questions till the end.
I think too, I mean, I agree with, it's such a, it's such a chaotic world. Like, I mean, we've got, if you're trying to get away from all the constant news cycle of wildfires and shootings and threats of nuclear war and hurricanes, and it's just a terrifying world. And we don't really know, we're all becoming so disconnected, like you said, with all the technology. So it's really tough. There's so few venues we can come together like this. That's why I was so grateful people showed up tonight, even in the face of Game 7. You guys, I mean, this is exciting for us to see anybody here wanting to learn more about this topic. So
That kind of fits into my big goal, which is to have cannabis lounges or some places where you can publicly use with your neighbors, your friends, or strangers. And do you see, maybe Dr. Uda, you can talk to this about, do you see any benefit to having places where people could come and collectively use it or sit around people that are using it? Is there a benefit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, when I was running the jails, I given the opportunity, I wouldn't have made cannabis available or voluntary. I would have made it mandatory. It's just the issue of the circumstances that we're at right now, and I've heard the discussions earlier. It almost makes me feel like the vets have to get out there and try harder, because 22 deaths a day, suicide is nothing compared to what's going on with opium in this country. So there's got to be a better way across the board for us to be more compassionate and understanding than the train wreck it seems we be a part of currently.
I've been impressed too, that, you know, the veteran community, the way they've come together and been really the tip of the spear here and educating the rest of our communities about how not just cannabis, but all sorts of banned plants. We have so many medically active plants that are not being allowed to be studied in the veterans community.
Rose hips, ginger root,
right.
There's endless opportunities.
So I've been grateful to see the veterans community kind of stepping forward and teaching the rest of society how these plants could be utilized, regardless of the government banning them and criminalizing them. These plants do have medical value, and I wish that, you know, other groups like, you know, the firefighters and police and all these other folks who know the value of these plants and refuse to step forward. That's why I have so much respect for the vet community, because they've been unafraid of stepping out of the shadows and talking openly about this. So,
Ton of camaraderie as well.
Yeah.
You know, getting together has been very impressive from all the veterans.
It looks like, you know, like professional football players maybe starting to come together like
Yeah.
that. Basketball players.
They should all be allowed to use it. It should be the first option, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Try natural things first, right?
yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah. And again, self-titration, where, you know, you can take 2 puffs or whatever, but anytime you go into a pill, then you have to take a set amount to begin with, and each time you take a larger amount. So I think marijuana is great as far as being able to take limited amounts until you adjust it for your own needs.
And you're not going to overdose on it.
Nope. Fall asleep.
Get really hungry.
How about this? What, and maybe Matthew, you can talk about this. How much do you think cannabis is not being considered because of politics or because of alcohol or you know, big tobacco, big pharma?
I would say 90% plus. There's a lot of closed door meetings, in my opinion, that we don't even know about. And there's a lot of money at stake, so I think a lot of these industries see this as a huge threat, regardless of quality of life and what's best for human beings in general. I think that's being overlooked for monetary reasons, which is completely ridiculous in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you
Yeah, I agree. I would say too, yeah. there's I mean, there's so many ultra wealthy, ultra powerful groups in this country that have a vested interest in keeping this illegal. And I mean, a perfect example, just from our perspective in Arizona, we have, we are dominated by private prisons there. And Arizona has had a medical cannabis law in place now for over 5 years. We have over 200,000 cardholders who are protected from being thrown in cages, and the private prison system hates it because were guaranteed. Yeah, they were guaranteed to be able to have these guys in their, in their paws, and so it's every year you see an effort to repeal these laws from these, whether it's private prisons, big pharma, law enforcement. All these folks are going to continue to battle back and make sure that they're very resentful, especially of these states that have ballot initiatives, because the voters can circumvent the legislature and make laws, and that's extremely frustrating. Luckily, folks like Tick are willing to allow that to happen, but the rest of the electeds are often very resentful of the way we've been doing this. So.
All right, well, anyway, thank you all for coming again on the 7th game night, very special. But you can see you have a fantastic panel, a lot of questions. They raised a lot of questions too. So it's obviously an area where we need to keep talking, but keep socializing. And I love the fact that we're all in this together. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good job. Thank you.